All right, good morning. Is everyone awake?
Yes. That's
Yeah.
the enthusiasm we like to hear.
All right, we have a few stragglers coming in, so we're gonna take it a little slow in the beginning. Hi, good morning.
We actually have time. We can probably hold for another minute or two.
We'll do basic introductions.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thank you so much for coming here on a Sunday morning instead of like going home or sleeping. We highly appreciate it. Hi, for context as to why we are up here and what we were doing, we're going to do some brief introductions. My name is Caitlin Farthing. I am an art historian and conservator/restorer. I currently work in disaster restoration, so fire, flood, tree through the roof. You have anything like that, I will fix your art. In art history, my research is primarily focused on what's known as visual narrative shorthand, or in video games is often known as environmental storytelling, which is how we use visuals to explain things to the audience that cannot, or either physically cannot, or for the sake of time and story cannot be told via language. You can't have a character say it to you, you can't really put it in text. These are all of the visual clues that are given to you throughout interacting with any piece of media. I hard love that stuff.
Yep.
To my left is the singular most intelligent, wonderful person on the planet. I'm not biased, my husband.
I am the wacky woohoo pizza man. Woo! This was like an all morning thing. I literally got up and I'm like, I'm wacky woohoo pizza man. Okay, I'm just kidding. So my name is Alex Abdoulaev. I have a doctorate in music history where I did my research at Boston University about the Savoy Ballroom in New York. So most of my main research is about jazz. But lately I've been kind of pivoting away from that into talking about film soundtracks, video game soundtracks, how music in interactive media affects our perception and understanding of gameplay mechanics and how we can tell stories through soundtracks.
Yeah, so anytime we engage with any piece of media, I'm like, hey, look at this cool, interesting thing that they did over in this corner. And he's like, did you see that? Did you hear this cool, interesting thing they did with the music? And I went, no.
Yeah, we were.
So our conversations tend to be very back and forth.
We're already like kind of spitballing ideas for next year. And one of them was that we want to talk about thematic transformation in Final Fantasy battle music. Because like, especially with the remake, there is some really, really cool stuff that they did to the Nobuo Uematsu themes. But more on that later. If you want to hear us talk about it, come talk to us after the panel, or just come back next year, because we'll probably be here with that panel.
So, two big things that we always do. One, we will probably swear. I don't see any children in the audience, but just a heads up. We'll try to keep the F-bombs to a minimum, but we are adults.
We are.
And it is Sunday morning. Two, we will have a few minutes at the end for questions, comments, any sort of suggestions you want to make. Don't be shy, but also under no obligation. We will also have QR codes up on the screen and our email addresses. So if at any point in like you're thinking about this at 3 a.m., you have a shower thought and you're like, man, I wish I could get this question answered, send it to us.
Yeah.
That is not like...
That's not like an imposition. We actually love talking about this stuff, so we will absolutely listen to your questions.
That is not like a polite, like, message me anytime. No, just send it to us.
Just send it to us.
We love talking about this stuff. And last of all, this is a disclaimer I like to give before all of our panels. Academia and academic presentations are really just someone who has spent a really, 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 really long time looking at something and telling you what they noticed. We are people, we are fallible, we cannot have every piece of research. There are things out there that will disprove our theses, there are things out there that will prove our theses. So we are smart, TM, we have degrees, they like,
at least
we didn't
in theory.
just pay for them.
I paid for mine, but
whenever you are engaging with academic research and academic presentations, think about what you are being told and think about how it relates to what you are doing when you are interacting with that thing that they're talking about.
For sure. All right, so I always like to start with a brief outline because you should know what you're getting into, and if this is a waste of your time, we will not hold it against you. If you need to walk out or go do something else, literally anything, it's fine. So what we're going to start with is why we're here at 11 o'clock in the morning, under-caffeinated and hungover. And this is going to provide some background and context on why this panel came about. Then we're going to talk about the idea of skill transference in theory and practice, both in terms of piano, because I'm a pianist. I have have been playing piano since I was 4 years old. You can thank my mom for the trauma. It's great.
Russian
I know, right?
parents.
Yeah, Russian parenting. It's great. Literally, my mom was like, "Hey, this kid's sitting at a piano. Let's make him do this for real and see if he can make some money with it." I did not make any money. And then we're going to do the same thing with Souls games and talk about activating prior knowledge and how that all ties in. Then we're going to talk about transference skills and how that ties in with academic research. It's a bit of a tangent, but it does kind of have some bearing on what it is we do kind of like as scholars and researchers and academics.
Yes.
And then we're going to talk about how to apply that theory. This is like the useful meat and potatoes portion of it, because we're going to go through Wynton Marsalis's 12-step program for practicing, and we're going to kind of proactively apply all of those ideas to Souls games and playing an instrument, because I use that 12-step regimen in my experiences, and I found it to be extremely helpful. Lastly, for our, because we're probably going to run a little short, we kind of timed it out. It's probably about 40, 45 minutes. So we're going to have a little bit of time at the end for you to come up and either, give us your own thoughts, experiences, share your opinions on what we said, and
tell
maybe
us that
provide
we're
us
wildly wrong.
or wildly right.
Yeah,
I like hearing that I'm right. It's a thing. And then we're just going to kind of wrap it up, and then you're welcome to go on to your next thing, whatever that may be. All right. So also fun fact, I did not realize this when I titled this panel, because I came up with the name Once More From the Top, and then the byline came Piano from Software and Skill Transference, and I was like, oh, once more from the top. Yeah. Look, it's like one of my favorite people once said, the dad jokes don't get better, but there will be more of them. So, strap in, I guess. All right, so how did this panel come about? So in the halcyon days of long time ago, 2020, March 13, you guys remember that? It was a good time. We were all stuck at home. Nobody was allowed to go anywhere, and I had literally two things to do. I had to practice piano, and I had to play Souls games, because I was like, you know what? In for a penny, in for a pound. Let's just do it. So I started practicing a lot of piano and just learning all this stuff. And then I also started playing Sekiro, because this was a game that was sitting on my hard drive since 2019. I haven't tried opening it. And I was like, this is a good time to start, hating myself more. So I started doing both of those things, and as I was doing it, I'm like, wait a second, this seems to be increasing my skill levels exponentially. What's going on? And then I started doing some thinking about it, and it occurred to me that a lot of things that I do in my piano practicing, and a lot of the things that I do in my score study and preparation for, whether it's solo or ensemble music, or just running jazz scales and licks and whatever, is a lot of the same stuff that I do in Souls games, because I play a lot of Souls games. And that kind of came to a head when we started talking about it, when I told my wife, hey, so this is a weird observation, and she was like, you should totally do a panel about this.
Yes.
I was like, score.
Because we have talked many times about, I hate the Souls games with an undying passion. I will not play them. I cannot stand it. I am very bad at video games, so they are torture to me. I played Kingdom Hearts 3 on the easiest mode. I could not beat the final boss. I tried 12 times. I threw the controller. He beat it on the second try, having not played a lick of the game.
It's just Devil May Cry. Okay,
not
I'm sorry.
Lick of the game. So we were talking about this, and we were talking about why do I hate Souls games so much? Because I adore the lore. I will listen to Vachavidya on repeat for hours. So I'm like, why do I hate these games so much if I love the lore and I love all of the things attached to it, right? And we were talking about it, and I hate repetition learning. I hate having to do something over and over and over and over again until you just finally get it right. I hate that. I can't stand learning like that. And that's why I was not a good musician when I was learning to play music, because I hated having to just go over it and over it and over it until it finally clicked. He loves that shit.
Well, it's not so much that I love it. It's more that it's been ingrained in my brain since I was literally 5 years old and started for the first time taking piano lessons with my surly Russian piano teacher way back in Soviet Russia. Basically, it was like, wrong, do it again, wrong, do it again, wrong, do it again. I will hit you if you do it again wrong.
Yeah.
Again, like I said,
And-
Soviet Russia. It's just go with it. Like child abuse was just part of the learning process.
But we were talking about
Yeah.
this, and how to me, having to start back over is a fail state. I have
Right.
lost, I am being punished. For him, having to start back over is I have learned another tiny new thing
Yeah.
that will help me on this next attempt. And that is two wildly different ways of viewing the
And-
same struggle.
Yeah, and there is a lot of overlap between having to do the same thing over and over and over in piano and getting things into your muscle memory and into your brain, as there is in games like Dark Souls and Bloodborne and Sekiro. Now, I do want to give one disclaimer because I know Elden Ring is an exceptionally popular game, and I do want to be respectful of that, but unfortunately we will not be talking about Elden Ring a whole lot. Two reasons. One of them is that I haven't finished it yet. I know. Just deep breaths. We'll get there. But the other reason is that Elden Ring is structured very differently from other Souls games. Elden Ring emphasizes exploration and curiosity, and the fail state for that, like dying, is not so much learning a skill as it is learning to adapt to the environment created by the world. There's also a lot of min-maxing. There's a lot of alternative character builds. So in that respect, it's much closer to Dungeons and Dragons than it is to a proper, like what I like to call a pure Souls game like Sekiro, where it's literally just you have a very limited tool set and you get to learn how to apply that tool set very actively to every possible situation. So essentially, the way Sekiro works is it's a series of skill checks. The game will teach you to do something, and then it will throw a skill check at you. If you pass that skill check, it'll dole out another bit of learning for you that you can then either internalize or discard, and then the process continues until you get to the end. But we're gonna break it all down later. There's more to talk about. Okay, so skill transference in theory and practice. So what is skill transference? This idea of skill transfers is something that's very, very common across most manual art disciplines. And it's the process of applying skills learned in one context to another context, frequently tangentially related, right? So if, let's say, you are a good artist, then chances are you can leverage that manual control that you have over a pencil or a brush into something like calligraphy, which is an art-related skill, but it's different because there's a different set of rules and metrics that apply to how you draw letters versus how you draw a figure. But ultimately what it boils down to is this, right? It's how you hold the brush, it's how you control the touch of the brush to paper, it's the extent to which you exercise the interface between this and the flat surface on which you're doing it.
Yeah, it's even things as simple as like if you run Excel for like database management, taking those skills that you have learned into like running a logistics company. It's taking the same base skill that you have, that same base understanding, and just shifting it a little bit over, and maybe you learn a couple new things, but you're already a little bit ahead because you have this other skill that leads into this.
Completely agreed. So first let's talk about how does that work with instrument learning, or piano specifically in my case. Just a very quick show of hands, my friends. How many of you are musicians here play an instrument?
Ooh,
Every
that's
single hand
not
goes
a-
up.
I don't know
That's
why I was
very
surprised.
good. Yeah.
I should not have been surprised knowing this panel title.
No, I'm not surprised. It's just, it gives me a lot more information to kind
How
of
many
go
of you
on.
played an instrument and then kind of fell out because life is hard? Yeah, everyone else in the room.
Right.
Same.
So what I'd like to kind of break down for you, and for a lot of you this is going to be old hat, but I think that it needs to be mentioned for context, is how exactly learning an instrument works on the fundamental level. So for about 6 years of my life, I taught at a piano school, and we used a method for that, right? So I'm not necessarily a big believer in adhering to a particular method. I like to take a bunch of different methods and concatenate a lot of the information, particularly when I'm working with younger kids or beginners. And there's a whole separate conversation to be had about like child learners versus like adult beginners, because there's a very different set of parameters by which you explain things. But what it can be boiled down to essentially is repetition and patterns, right? So when we're starting with early levels, for those of you who are familiar with like learning, I'm going to use piano as an example, but feel free to apply to your chosen instrument. When I'm teaching piano, the earliest thing you do is you explain topography of the keyboard as an instrument and what the patterns are, right? And the pattern is very simple. It's 3 and 2 and 3 and 2. So you use those black keys as the indicators, and you just have them play on the black keys. Eventually, they'll recognize that there is a repeating pattern, that those 3 notes are going to be the same across every single octave. Those 2 notes are going to be the same across every single octave. They're just displaced by an order of magnitude. So once you get them into that, you start explaining the white keys, and you talk about, like, well, here's the C. You have to find every single C. And then you learn the note names, and then figure out that they repeat. So you're noticing that there's already a lot of pattern recognition, a lot of pattern memorization. From that point on, you can start building on hand positions, and you can start adding like visual and oral skills by learning to recognize a note by the way it sounds. So you like take a kid and you say, okay, so here's the C. Without looking at the keyboard, can you find me another C, right? And eventually they'll get around to it. And after they do it enough times, they'll get really comfortable with it. And then you just have them like figure out how to find a C based on what they see, pun intended, on the sheet music. So like you say, like, what's that note? Just have them play it, right? What's that note? Have them play it. So once they get comfortable enough with the visual manual coordination, that's usually about the time when they have the necessary building blocks to start actually playing music. And I'm sure this is going to come as no surprise to anybody. Music is just a really complicated set of patterns, right? Eventually, like if you know, even if you take like some of the really obscure out there music from like the 20th century, like George Crumb or Arnold Schoenberg or Alban Berg, you're still going to have to use patterns. Like there is going to be some kind of method or system. Now, granted, that method or system is going to be far more advanced and complicated and easier to and harder to recognize as you're doing it, but it is nevertheless going to be based on some sort of pattern, because guess what? We only have 12 notes in an octave, or 11 notes in an octave, right? After that, it has to repeat. And, you know, like if you want to talk about like set theory, if you want to talk about like retrograde inversion and things like that, that's really advanced stuff, but it still factors into this notion of patterns, right? It's just how those patterns are permutated. So once you get down with the easy stuff, this is when you move into the more mid-tier things. And the mid-intermediate level stuff is basically building on complex patterns to add nuance, dynamics, and general but gradual increase in complexity of repertoire, right? So you're starting to learn pieces, you're applying all those fundamental hand skills that you've learned as a beginner to actual repertoire. Anything you want to?
Nah, keep going.
No? Okay, cool.
I stopped playing an instrument. This is fascinating
That's
to me.
fair, that's fair. So again, like it builds on pattern recognition. The whole idea is that it builds on pattern recognition. It adds groupings, and it adds additional like hand-eye coordination, because you have to identify different symbols, like, you know, crescendo, diminuendo, nuance, like all that stuff. Bless you. And then once you get to the advanced level, this is where it's going to start giving you the reins, so to speak. It's going to put a complicated piece of signifiers and symbols in front of you and say, like, okay, to the best of your knowledge and ability, interpret this, right? And once you get to the advanced level, that is kind of where the system that you've learned is handed over to you for control. This is now your game, so to speak. You are now in control and in charge of how you take those ideas and how you run with them and how you interpret them and what you make of them. Now, no two interpretations are ever going to be the same, but they're all going to be based on the same set of fundamental skills that you're going to be using for the rest of your life as a musician, right? And what's really interesting for me, and I'm not sure how many of you have similar experiences, but I frequently go back to pieces that I've played like in my intermediate period, and just look at ways that I interpret them differently based on my current level versus like what I did when I was like, 10 years old. And it's always such an interesting revelation to see like how much more juice I can squeeze out of like, I don't know, some intermediate level stuff, right?
Yes. So when we're talking about this, that was a whole lot to talk about. When we talk about in the beginning, you're shown, just the basic hit this button, it does this thing. Mm-hmm. And then you build up into pattern recognition and the music, you are taught how to play the music and how to react to the music. Does that sound familiar to the process of playing games? Where the game starts you out with, hit this button to jump. All you are going to do is jump. Now you're going to run. Now you're going to swing the sword. And then suddenly at the end of the game, you're semaphoring this boss's specific attack and this different one's specific attack. And you're trying to figure out which way you're going to run around the room and not die.
Yeah. One of the best examples that I've heard used as a learning tool for how to play video games is the first World 1-1 of Super Mario. Right? This is like all the way back on the original Nintendo. It puts you all the way on the left side of the screen, so you really only have one way you can go. And because the number of inputs is so limited, you literally have the 4 directional buttons plus a jump button. That's it, right? So basically your options are so incredibly limited, so as you're moving through it, you get to experiment with the different buttons. So you can jump and hit a brick, or you can like not jump and get eaten by a Goomba. So now you know not to get eaten by a Goomba, so you have to jump on top of it or over it, and depending on how you do it, you're gonna experientially get to the point where you learn through immersion and through self guidance how the game works. And so ideally, with each subsequent world and each tier, more and more challenges are added that are basically like, do this thing, but now harder, right?
Yes. Has anyone played Pathfinder, the tabletop game? How many of you played the beginner box? Yeah. Anyone who knows the beginner box knows it's the single best introduction to TTRPGs, because it starts you with basic combat where status effects are involved, combat where advantage and disadvantage is involved, in combat where resistances and vulnerabilities are involved, and it teaches you all of these really, really dense TTRPG mechanics in like 6 or 7 combats in a dungeon. It's amazing. Highly, highly recommend if you want to learn to play TTRPGs.
So I'm assuming
that is what we're talking about here, is how that way of learning is applied not just to music, not just to video games, not just to TTRPGs, but the way you learn helps you learn other things.
100% agreed. So this is where we get into FromSoft games and this idea of activating prior knowledge. So show of hands, how many of you are Souls players? Or Bloodborne, Sekiro, whatever?
Again, should not have been surprised.
But you all know that like basically every Souls game is essentially blank but hard, right? So if you think about it, like Bloodborne, it's Super Mario but hard. Bloodborne, or rather Dark Souls is like Super Mario but hard. Bloodborne is Devil May Cry but hard. Sekiro, Metroidvania plus Samba de Amigo, but hard, right?
Elden Ring, D&D, but hard. Yeah, like D&D is not hard enough.
Exactly. So the point is that like you already kind of have all the necessary skills as somebody who is playing, unless this is like the first video game you've picked up ever, in which case, I'm so sorry. Oh boy.
That is a cool prank to play on someone.
But unless you have no prior experience with this, you're already going to be on some level familiar with it. So basically the way each Souls game is structured is it's going to follow the very same thing. So it's going to give you a very brief, nebulous introduction that gives you just enough context to ease you into the game world, hook you on the ideas, give you some unattached names and concepts, right? The perfect example is the intro to Sekiro, right? Where it just kind of shows you some like very uninterconnected images. It throws out the name Ishin Ashina. What is that? Like, who is that? We don't know. And then as you get into the game, it very slowly teaches you the basics. It's like, okay, so you use the left controller stick to move around. You do the button to jump. You do the button to attack. You do the button to block. And then it throws your first challenge at you, right? And one of the interesting things about Sekiro is that the first part is just like the stuff that's non-combat. It's just stealth. It's like, okay, so it emphasizes the importance of something like stealth to a game like Sekiro because it teaches that to you first. Before you get a sword, before you can come up to dudes and stab them, it's like, okay, cool. So you can avoid them. You can avoid conflict by hiding in this grass and like running around the edge of the screen so that you don't have to get got, right? But it's the same thing for pretty much every Souls game after that or before that as well.
Yeah, when you start Bloodborne, you go into your first fight with no weapons.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to die. Someone told me a story that they beat it. They beat the
you can punch the werewolves.
Yeah.
It takes a while. Yeah.
Question, yes.
Yeah. So, exactly, and that's a really excellent point. The game gives you lots of options to get around that. So you can die, right? You can stand your ground and die. You can stand your ground, be really good at this, and punch them to death. You can backstab them, or just run away. Run away, right? It's just like, so long as you get through that first gate and like up the ladder, good, you're home free. You get into the hunter's dream, done, right? So it presents you with a variety of options, all of which are viable. The other thing that's really interesting about the early stages, and this is something that's I've noticed in most Souls games, but also like there's some of that in Sekiro, early on, like it presents you with a optional fight that is difficult but not impossible. So Dark Souls 3, everybody remember Dark Souls 3? So like the first part where you just get out into the world, there's like a little alcove you can go into, and there's like an ice lizard there, right? And this is a difficult fight at your level. Like it's not impossible, but it is tough. But what it does is it teaches you a bunch of really important things. One is that
it features all of the mechanics you need for the boss that's at the end of the hallway.
Right, yeah.
So like, if you stop and practice here, you'll know exactly what to do when you have to go face the real boss.
And the thing is that lizard has the same exact set of attacks as Judex Gundyr, right? So it has area of effect attacks and it has direct thrust attacks. So for one of them, you dodge sideways, and for the other one, you back away, right? And those are the exact things you need to do with Gundyr, apart from like the fact that when he like beasts out and he has that big like slime thing coming, I don't know, no, whatever, you know what I'm talking about. You just need to get really close. So there's another layer of challenge. But it's essentially, here's the really important thing. It's so early in the game that all of those like souls you might have accumulated, first of all, there's so few of them. And second of all, if you die, like it doesn't matter. But if you don't die and if you beat the ice lizard, you actually get some really useful stuff that you can use later on towards your progress. So it actually gives you like a couple of levels, right? Which is really, really important because it gives you a leg up on the next segment. So that gives you just enough of a concept of understanding for how the game is going to work. It eases you into the process and essentially presents you with a skill check where you do the thing, and then it says, okay, so now you get to take that and apply it proactively. And the way the game builds on that is just by gradually layering layers of complexity on top of that. So you just go from Gundyr to, like, there is another optional fight with a naked dude with a katana, and then you can also, I'm not making this up, by the way.
These games are wild, y'all.
There's a lot of, look,
y'all.
for all of the gravitas and seriousness, they are goofy as shit.
Look, we can't have everything be nightmares, okay?
Right, sure. And then, you know, like the same thing can be applied to Bloodborne. Like instead of, if you go towards like the plaza with all of the dudes, if you turn left, there is like an executioner type enemy. And again, you can take all of those dodging and attack skills, you apply them there. But if you fight the cleric beast, it teaches you some really important things, like how to use a power attack, how to use a transform attack, how to dodge, how to recover your health after you are hit. So, you know, unless you haven't been paying attention, which I wasn't my first time around in Bloodborne, I'm like, oh, this is just like Dark Souls. Like, nope, baby boy.
Yeah, no.
Sekiro gives you General Naomori Kawarada, who essentially is going to re-emphasize this idea that, oh, you should probably get around him and backstab him instead of trying to whittle down his health and posture for 2 rounds instead of 1. So you make the fight easier for yourself. The game is very easy about teaching you things. Okay, so essentially what this boils down to is it's a series of Skinner boxes. You learn a skill.
Are y'all familiar with what a Skinner box is?
Okay, so it's basically a system where if you do the thing, you get a reward, and then you learn through the process of repetition that certain things will net you rewards, and if you do them better, you get bigger rewards, right? It's like, it's the thing with like a rat pressing a button and the treat comes out if the rat presses the right button. But it's basically that, right? And then your prior experience and subsequent understanding essentially dictates how you progress through the game. And that is where the malleability of the Souls games comes into play.
Yes.
Because you're fundamentally learning a set of skills, but then how you apply those skills is entirely on you.
Yes, some bosses require you to use very specific skills, but as you get later in the game, you don't have to fight a specific way.
Yeah.
You can use all of these different skills that you've picked up. Like, yeah, the first boss, you have to do it the way it needs to be done or you're just gonna die, I'm sorry. But as you get through the game into these more high-level, difficult bosses, you get to decide how you face them down. You get to take all of these skills and choose what does and doesn't work for you.
All right, I've talked for a bit. This is your department.
How many of you had to write a research paper in college? And how many of you both loved researching but hated writing the paper? Yeah. How many of us like really love digging through codex entries in video games? Yeah. There's a reason I saw the same hands go up. And we're going to talk about this because the reason this is in here is because how many of you are familiar with the Dark Souls and Soulsborne lore community, and particularly our Lord and Savior Vachavidya? I love that man to the depths of my soul. So, as I said in the very beginning of this panel, I hate Soulsborne games. I will not play them. I cannot play them. I have tried so many times and I hate it. But I love the lore. I adore the lore. And so one of the things we want to talk about is that even though I can't play the games, I can still get an incredible amount of enjoyment out of them because of the way the lore is handled. Because the lore community is doing academic level historical research. It absolutely is. How many of you are familiar with Tune and Fairweather? Okay, can you pull them up real quick? Sure. Tune and Fairweather are a high-end bookbinder their website. Yeah, they're a high-end bookbinder who work with Vachavidya to produce lore books for Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and Elden Ring. They produce these. They produce both absolutely like gorgeous bound editions as well as just paperbacks. But all of their books, with like minor exception, are about like the mythology of Elden Ring. The one that this was actually a pre-ordered present for my husband for Christmas. This is about Paradox and Bloodborne. This is all compendiums of the lore because there is no set lore from the game designers. Because, now there's a really interesting reason why it works that way. How many of you are familiar with where Dark Souls came from? Like why it's written the way that it is? Yeah, so the guy who wrote Dark Souls is a huge fan of Western fantasy, but in the 80s, Western fantasy novels did not get translated to Japanese very often or particularly well. And particularly that was before a lot of localization was much of a thing. So you could translate it, but you couldn't explain those cultural references that are so ingrained into a Western society, but are not grained into an Eastern society. This is why we talk a lot about how localizing anime can be very, very difficult, because Americans just don't understand the cultural references being made. So he had to understand these novels, either rely on other people in the fantasy community or just kind of figure it out via context clues. So that's why in the lore of particularly Dark Souls, there's no set like, it's not like Dragon Age, where you have the story from beginning to end and you have all of these clues. It's kind of just, you piece it together from off sentences that different NPCs say and different things from different items. And so what the community does, which is fascinating, is that there are people who have devoted an incredible amount of time to finding all of these little, if I go to this NPC before I do this thing, they'll say one thing, but if I go after, they'll say something slightly different. And that tells me more about why Sif the Scaleless betrayed all of the other dragons. We'll also look at item descriptions. And if you watch Vachavidya's videos, he'll go, well, you take these 3 different item descriptions and you take these specific sentences and it tells you this very specific piece of lore. That is historical level research. How many of you had to write a document-based question in AP history classes when you took the AP exam? Yeah. Does anyone remember what we had to do for a document-based question? You had to pick your document, but then you had to do something extra special with it. You had to justify why that document was valid for the argument you were making. And that is one of the things that we talk about with the Soulsborne community, is that there are unreliable pieces of history within the Soulsborne community. Like, let's talk about that amulet you get at the beginning of Dark Souls that tells you it does all of these. What does it do? It gives you all this, the amulet that says that it gives you all of this health and makes you vaguely invulnerable and blah, 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 blah. It doesn't do it.
Yep.
But you have been trained by interacting with the Dark Souls lore community to believe what item descriptions say. So there's a huge part of the community that does all of this work to figure out what's a reliable versus an unreliable narrator in determining bias and in determining just objectively false information, which is, again, how historic academic research works. I am so serious when I say this. If the Soulsborne lore community tried to solve the historical mysteries of the world, they probably could.
Yeah, the Voynich manuscript, we would have that shit
Get on the Voynich
translated.
manuscript, please, please. You could solve it so fast.
I mean,
Yes,
it would
question.
be pretty great.
Yeah, so on the topic of like unreliable narration,
Yes.
like within the lens of war, I think one interesting example I remember is like in the Elden Ring. So you know that like the people that use sorcery, the astrologers.
Yes.
The Starface. So you have a bunch of different factions that all claim like that they're descended from them. You have like the Raya Lucaria skull. But in if you read the item description, it says like they're direct descendants. They're the true heirs of those astrologers. But if you go into like what was it, the carrying preceptor that you remember Celadus, like it's the exact same thing. And keep in mind, those two are like the Carians and the Raya Lucaria scholars are kind of in infighting. Like,
Yeah.
Right.
So that's kind of also a good
Yeah.
example.
Yeah, pointing out in Elden Ring the different very in contention with each other factions claiming to all be the descendants of these people who, the astrologers who created magic. And that's one of the things that we talk about in historical research. How many of you have heard that story that poop was everywhere in Versailles? Yeah, it's not true.
Not true.
It comes from a dude who worked in sanitation vaguely,
Yeah.
who went to Versailles and wrote a letter that it was covered in poop because he didn't like Versailles.
Right.
It's a factually incorrect letter, but because it's a primary source, a lot of people consider it to have more weight as a historic document. So when we're talking about, the way the Soulsborne community handles their lore versus, the way the historic community handles primary, secondary, tertiary resources, it's the same exact work. It's the same exact work being done. And so if you're big into Soulsborne lore, please potentially look into doing history work, even volunteering for your local historical society, because they will have so many fascinating, stupid little documents for you to dig through that no one's looked at in decades. Genuinely, it is the same exact skill. And I know this is about music, but I just had to put that in there because the Soulsborne lore community deserves to be recognized for the incredible amount of work they do and the genuinely academic level of work that they are doing.
And all of it is unpaid.
Unpaid, for free.
It's literally just a labor of nothing but love. I have a theory that a lot of, with the way the community portion of Dark Souls games or Soulsborne games has been designed, is it's specifically made with that in mind. It is meant to engage the community. Soapstone notes, your favorite thing, Trifinger,
Summons
but
in Elden Ring. There's a reason that you can summon other players to help you.
And you can leave notes for people either warning them of the things that are coming up ahead or of things that, or just trolling them, right? So there's a fairly robust community of people who just leave soapstone notes for each other. And to this day, you can still see a lot of those things in Dark Souls. In Sekiro, you have echoes where you can see how somebody might have died or how somebody might have gotten through a particular portion of the game.
Every time he plays these games, even though I don't play them and I'm watching him, I'm like, no, stop, go look at that. He's like, I know what it says. I'm like, no, I want to see it. I want to see what the community has said.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is always a glyph of someone jumping off a cliff.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep. And that is intentional.
Pointing out that when you play Elden Ring for the first time, there's a glyph of someone jumping off the cliff in the very beginning.
Yep. Absolutely. Okay, so now the reason you're all here.
Thank you for indulging my little interjection.
No, this is a really important context. I mean, it's not related. It is very closely connected to all that because it is another transferable skill. So now at long last we get to the meat and potatoes of this. That is like, how do you get better at practicing a musical instrument, but also how does that apply to Dark Souls and Elden Ring and Bloodborne and Sekiro? Okay, so are you guys familiar with Wynton Marsalis? Okay, so he's a jazz trumpeter, but he became, he comes from he comes from a vast family of jazz musicians in New Orleans, and one of his claims to fame was that he, in the same year, in 1988, received both a Grammy for jazz and for classical music. So he's a highly accomplished, very proficient jazz musician who also is an educator. If you watch Ken Burns' documentary called Jazz, he's probably one of the primary contributors to the research on this. So very smart dude. He has a lot of unorthodox opinions about like what music is and how it should be done. We're not here to talk about that. He is, however, extremely instrumental, pun intended, in how we learn how to play a musical instrument. And he came up with a really interesting 12-step program. So the first step is seek out instruction. I mean, I think that this goes without saying that the best way to learn how to play an instrument is to find an experienced and good teacher.
We believe in experts.
We believe in experts, and as somebody who has benefited from a variety of experts, both of the kind and not so kind fashion, my college instructor, Dr. Thomas Mastriani, was very formative in how I approach my learning process by explaining to me what exactly I need to do in order to get better, and also demonstrating to me how exactly those ways work. The same thing can be said, we just literally talked about this with Dark Souls, is that a lot of the community engagement, whether it's through the lore analysis or if it's through glyphs and soapstone notes or echoes in Sekiro, is very similar. It teaches you how to do things.
Yep.
So
even just watching streamers play the games
Yeah.
and looking at, because there are people who make their whole career out of making
Extra Life.
YouTube videos
Yeah.
about how to handle these bosses.
Yeah, big shout out to Fextra Life, who basically was the person who ignited my interest in those games because I was awful at them. And then I was like, you know what, let me watch somebody do this correctly. And so I pulled up a Fextra Life video where it was just a stream of the first hour of Dark Souls and an explanation of how exactly do you do this well. And there was no commentary, no anything. I just watched him play. I'm like, oh, okay, so I've been doing this wrong. So that kind of influenced my process of skill building. Second is write out a schedule. Well, in writing out a schedule, one of the things that I used to do is just kind of sit at the piano and just practice whatever, But it turns out that if you structure your process, it's so much more helpful. So if you spend the first 10 to 20 minutes just doing nothing but technique, so scales, arpeggios, jazz licks, finger exercises. I like the Brahms 40 finger exercises that are very good at activating different parts of your rhythm, of your finger technique and all that stuff. It turns out that actually really helps, especially if you do it over a length of time. It's just like any other skill. If you're hoping to get stronger, you're gonna wanna go to the gym and work out a certain muscle group. Same thing here. It's a part of your memorization and muscle memory process.
Yeah. And so in Soulsborne, even in other video games, it comes down to, well, I only have a certain amount of time today, so I'm gonna do this specific quest, or I'm gonna go try and grind this boss. You set a schedule so that you're not just running around wasting all of your time.
Yeah, and my jazz instructor at Rutgers University, Lewis Porter, actually very specifically wrote me out a schedule that said 10 to 20 minutes technique, 40 minutes of learning new stuff, 30 to 40 minutes of methodological skill building, 40 minutes of running pieces, and then the last 30 to 40 minutes you can just do whatever you want for you, right? So that kind of adds up to roughly 2.5, 3 hours a day, which is a good time. And also the important thing is taking breaks, right? That's another big thing. And the same thing can be said of Souls games. You just need to set yourself a schedule. Just don't expect to go in and ace the whole game on one go. Set yourself a goal. I'm gonna get this. You write yourself a schedule, get to this point, get to this point, get to this point, and this is how much time you have. Setting goals, it's kind of tangentially related. Just know what you want to accomplish with every practice session in both things, right?
Yeah, today I want to go in and I want to nail perfect parry.
Yeah.
Or today I want to go in and I am going to finally grind this one boss that I can't beat no matter how many times I've tried.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a big goal. It can just be I want to get to that thing over there. Right. It's important to know what you want out of a skill, Because if you're going to try to like do everything, you're not going to accomplish it. Concentrate.
Self-explanatory.
Self-explanatory. Your concentration is extremely important. I liked when I practice, I like to remove distractions because particularly when you're playing piano, it's very easy to get distracted, and if you're doing it in your own
I have
house.
to take the cats out of the room.
Yeah.
The cats are not allowed
the
in when the
cats
piano
are,
practice is
because
happening.
the cats love the idea. It's like, oh, daddy's not paying attention to me. Let's go ahead and bother him. So this is why my best practicing is usually done in a practice room at my university as opposed to at home, right? It is possible to do it at home, but I like to minimize distraction. Same thing in Souls games, just focus, right? If you need to remove distraction, if you just need to zone in, I like turning the lights off. I like having just the thing in front of me, and moving straight through it. Relax and practice slowly. I mean, this is easier done in piano than it is in Dark Souls, but... I
mean, the best thing for Dark Souls with this is the campfire system, because you can just pop back over... Yeah. You can redo things. And, seek out things that are maybe a little more fun as opposed to skill-based.
Yeah, that's true. Practicing hard things longer... again, a lot of these are fairly self-explanatory, but for reinforcement purposes in musical instruments, it's very useful to spend extra time on things. Even if you think you've got them, it's always useful to
It's
just
very
go
easy to
over them.
forget how to do things that you think you know.
Because a very specific skill, you might be able to do it in the moment, but you're probably going to lose it if you don't reinforce it. And by practicing it longer, you reinforce it. One of my favorite examples is when I was an undergrad, my piano teacher assigned me the piece Jeu d'eau by Maurice Ravel. And if any of you know this piece, it's not like a difficult work, but it does require some fairly unconventional piano techniques and skills. And by doing it so much, like you could put a piano in front of me right now and I'll probably be able to play it for you, not perfectly, but most of the way there. So I have it in my memory to the extent that I can literally spend an hour refreshing it and just have it, right? And the same thing is true with Dark Souls. Like you can just run bosses over and over and over and refine your skills. Now, there's no like boss attack mode, but you can like biff it at the end and just go right back to the bonfire, run it again, biff it at the end, run back to the bonfire, do the whole thing again.
Yep.
Right. Learn from your mistakes.
Yep.
Again, self-explanatory. I don't think I need to really go into that, but like every failure is a step towards success. Analyze that, right? Both in your instrumental practice and in Dark Souls. Don't show off. I mean, I know that we all want a Deep Extra Life.
We all want to be that person who beat every single Dark Souls game in order without dying once, and if they died, they had to restart the entire trilogy. We all want to be that person. We cannot all be that person. I'm sorry, we can't.
I love that, but it just sounds like self-flagellation.
I mean, he did cry hard when he finally did it. Bless that person.
But I'm like, dude, I have sympathy for you, but not that much. You did this to yourself. Like, love you, but also this is a self-imposed punishment. Practice with expression. Well, this one is, I mean, I don't know how you play Dark Souls with expression, but I can tell you that in piano, you definitely need to, like, even if you're doing things slowly, if you're doing just one chunk of it, play it as if you're playing it in concert, right? Because that is not something you want to add later on. That is something you want to work into your process because the technique and the way you do it is also connected inherently to how that affects your artistry as a musician. And I guess the same thing can be said of Dark Souls, right? Like, I mean, to some extent, like the way you do something, how deliberately you tackle something, what your methodology is also going to affect the aesthetic of it. Because there is an aesthetic angle to a lot of these games.
I would argue that practice expression for a Dark Souls game might be like, how do you specialize your build?
Yes, practice with expression is how, as I was saying, for those who can't hear all the way back, is how do you build your character?
Yeah.
On all decks, you don't have a shield for this fight, you're not specialized for that.
Right.
Expression, how would you fight this as an all decks build?
Yeah, how do you fight this with your specific character build?
Yep.
I saw another hand go up. Would enthusiasm? With enthusiasm, I think it's also a good substitute for the word expression. That's good. Thank you.
I think that's actually a really good point and a kind of a tangent. So every single piece of music ever written is intended to be played by a person. Every single Dark Souls game is intended to be beaten by a person.
What's the Dark Souls equivalent of John Cage's
Oh my god, the whole thing?
The character creation screen.
Yes.
You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah. You guys have already done the next one on the
Yeah.
list. Think for yourself.
Yeah. I mean,
That's
I don't think I
exactly
need
what
to go
just
into-
happened in this room.
Yeah, I mean, I just touched on be optimistic. Like every single piece of music is written to be played by human hands, right? It's just a matter of making that necessary adjustment to make it work. And the same thing, like however you want to use your technique and approach this, every single boss can be beaten. The great thing about Dark Souls is that it psychs you out, right? Like the cleric beast is terrifying. It's as big as a house, right? And yet,
But it can be beaten.
you can beat it. Like,
You may cry a whole lot before you do it, but you can do it.
yeah. So if you're beating your head against the wall, something's not working with your tactics. So just reassess, go back, reevaluate, and be optimistic about it. And finally, look for connections.
Which is why we're here.
This entire point of this panel is looking for connections, is trying to figure out how exactly these things are connected. Okay.
Yes. So,
Without talking you all to death, does anybody have any experiences or things
yes.
that they would like to share?
We're gonna have people come
Yeah.
up because we will have a microphone set up. So if you have thoughts, feelings, experiments, questions, get ready and come up to talk into a microphone. You do not have to by any means, but there is one thing I want to leave you guys with at the end of this panel. How many of you have heard the phrase "practice makes perfect"? It is an objectively incorrect phrase. Practice makes habit.
Yeah.
It does not make perfect, and that is something I want you guys to take with you
Yeah.
into all of your gaming and the other things that we talked about.
Yeah.
Thank
it's
you
true.
so much for attending.
Yeah.
Please rate the panel on Guidebook.
Yeah, but
MAGFest really wants it for numbers and data and reasons, so please go into the Guidebook and rate the panel.
and please feel free to come up and share your
Yes.
experiences. Like
Now is the
it doesn't
time
have
to
to
come
be
be
questions.
smart.
You can just tell us about your experiences with practice
Yes.
with Souls games.
Thank
We're
you,
here
thank
to
you,
hear
thank
it.
you.
Thank you all.
Thank you for attending. Feel free to come up. Rate it in the Guidebook. MAGFest really wants that data.
I would also say that do either of you play fighting games or not really?
So I used to play Soul Calibur a lot.
Oh,
Like on the Dreamcast. Like that's how old I am, right? But yeah, so a little bit.
Got you. Also, Monster Hunter. The things you're talking about is like, oh, I'm going to play online. I'm going to practice this character. I'm going to practice execution. Oh, my hand's tired. I need to take a break.
Right.
Very, very similar. And same with Monster Hunter. I need to learn this monster's patterns. I need to learn how to use my build for that.
Right.
How did I specialize? So just very applicable to other games that I'm familiar with as well.
Completely agree with that. I don't have a lot of experience with Monster Hunter, but from what I've seen, it's very methodical in how it
Yes.
approaches those challenges.
I mean, this is very much like game design as well as,
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
not just exclusive to the Soulsborne games, but I think the Soulsborne games do a particularly excellent version of it. Because there are a lot of games like, look, I love Potionomics. I think it's really pretty. Everyone here has suffered through that first fight.
I still haven't beaten it.
Because
I don't know
it
how.
does not teach you. There are games that do not teach you how to play them very well.
Gotcha.
And I think the Soulsborne games, as much as I cannot play them, do an exceptional job of teaching you how to play them.
Gotcha. And last thing, Lies of P. Thoughts?
Love Lies of P.
I thought I was going to hate the crap out of that game. I was like, oh, this will be fun, a little time waster. And then I was like, oh, I love this.
I have been
weirdly good.
I was cautiously optimistic for a long time because I saw a lot of the preview stuff come out for it, and I went, this looks really cool, but I am always a little skeptical anytime anything lists itself as a Souls-like.
Yes.
Anytime it says Souls-like, I'm like, does this
Yeah.
just mean I'm going to hate my
Yeah.
life?
Is this going to be derivative? Oh,
Is
it has
this
its
going to
own
be
thing.
like you just made it hard for the sake of padding runtime, or is this
Right.
going to actually be interesting? Like, what do you mean Souls-like? Because that word means a lot
It
nowadays.
means a lot. Yeah, it's true.
So I am.
Yeah.
I love the more human you make yourself, or the more like robotic.
Yeah.
You make yourself. I love that. That's
Lies of P
that's
lovers.
actually one that
Excellent.
we're looking at doing a panel
job.
about.
Thank you
That's
very
a
much.
fantastic game. Thank you. All right.
Thank you so much.
Badge.
Here, just take-
This is less so of a question, but more so of a thought.
Yes.
Please.
When we were discussing when Marshall's 12-step program,
Yes.
phenomenal musician. I've had a chance to attend his talks.
Sure.
take
Oh,
his master classes.
wow.
Phenomenal musician. But the one thing that was brought up in one of the courses that we discussed was rather than just practice, it was deliberate practice.
Yes.
And nobody
Yes.
ever seems to kind of understand the difference. It's more so like you cannot go into it just kind of noodling around on it. If you want to
Absolutely.
get better, you have
Yeah.
to pick a thing
yeah.
and do it.
Yeah.
We talk about that a lot. We met swing dancing.
Right.
And that's one thing we talk a lot about in swing dancing is people talking about desperately wanting to improve
Yeah.
and not improving when they were going social dancing.
Yep.
It's like
Right.
because you're not practicing the things you need to practice. You're
Right,
just
you're-
having
you're
fun.
not honing in
Which
on
like
it.
yes, just doing it will still help you practice,
Yeah.
but if you want to improve specific things, you have to go practice that specific thing.
Setting time aside with the intent of improving a very specific facet of your skill set
Right.
is absolutely important. And I
Yes.
think that that's a really good
That's an
observation.
excellent point.
It's just more so like everybody always thinks like, oh, you know, like you said, like just do the thing, and I was like, you can't just do the thing because eventually you're just repeating it,
Right.
and you're not taking notes, you're not changing anything.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Thank
that's
you
a
again,
yeah.
guys.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so
so
much.
much.
Yep. Go ahead and pass it on.
You said you hadn't beaten Elden Ring yet.
I have not even gotten through 10% of it.
Yeah.
Do the quests.
I will
Yes.
do the.
Look,
You-
I'm a
yes, sir.
Dragon Age fan. I am team do every single side quest
Yeah.
you can find.
You will get locked out.
Mm-hmm.
You will get locked out.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, it requires multiple playthroughs, I assume.
New Game Plus is
Okay.
a thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
if you hate yourself,
Yeah.
you can go to New Game Plus 7.
Right.
I saw those shaking heads.
Don't do it.
But yeah, thank you for the. Thank
I
you for
appreciate that. Yes, for sure.
We always appreciate
Uh-huh.
the tips and tricks.
Yes, sir.
Hello.
So when we were talking about the structure of setting up, or the structure of how Dark Souls teaches you, where
Yeah.
you said that this character that you fight, that you might die on a few times, has the exact same attack patterns as the upcoming boss at the end of the hallway.
Right.
That got me thinking about the philosophy behind how the Mario developers build their levels.
Yes.
That's exactly it.
Yes.
It forces you to make mistakes so that you learn from them onward.
And I actually just looked up because I wanted to make sure I knew what I was talking about.
Sure.
It's a narrative structure that's used in like Japanese comics and Chinese
Yep.
poems
Yeah.
called Kisho Tenketsu, which is you establish a concept, you develop it further,
Right.
you put a twist on it,
Right.
and then you do a final conclusion that wraps
Yeah.
it all up.
Yes.
Which is very logical. Like if
Yes.
you really think about it, it's very, very regimental. That
As somebody
way.
who is not an instrumentalist, but I'm
Sure.
a vocalist, I
Okay.
have been for most of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you know that's also like learning a skill and building that skill,
That
right?
Kisho
That is your
Tenketsu
instrument.
makes me think of like, yeah, I'm going to start out, we're just going to run through the piece once. Okay, now that we've run through it, where are some problem places? Let's go
Yeah.
ahead and delve deeper.
Yes. Exactly.
And then finally you're getting
Right.
to the end of it. Honestly, I felt that we did a choir workshop here yesterday. We went through that exact same structure. It made me think
Yes.
so much of this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. That is
Absolutely, completely agree.
yeah. Here,
All right.
hand it to the
Just
person
get-
behind you.
and to the person behind you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much.
I don't really have an answer here, but
Okay.
more of an open question about
Yes,
how
sure.
do you keep things fun?
Yeah, I struggle with that. There's a reason I don't play instruments anymore.
Because I feel like in a lot of the Soulsborne
Yeah.
games,
Oh,
it's not fun at first, and then when you like get enough skill to get going,
So I think that's kind of exactly what happens in music, right? So you're not going to start out having a good time. There are going to be moments of frustration, particularly when you're learning a new piece or learning a new skill. You're constantly going to be kind of forcing yourself to get through it. But I think the idea is that you want to keep your eyes on the end goal.
You can also Pavlov yourself.
That's true.
If you really, really, really want to get into it, you can give yourself little treats for doing things
Yeah.
and Pavlov yourself
yeah.
into enjoying it.
Yeah,
That's a
'cause-
lot of work, though.
For me, there's a couple of things. It's mostly about keeping in perspective what the ultimate objective is. Because I do love playing in public. I enjoy playing for people. And that's kind of like my reward. So in thinking that like, okay, once I get through this next bit,
Do you ever, like-
I am that much closer to
Yeah.
the ultimate goal of actually taking this to a concert hall or to a gig and playing it, you know?
do you ever like put carrots on a stick or like little M&Ms along the way to kind of keep you?
I mean,
Yeah, you can get, the little treats help. As someone who has ADHD, who has a hard time with the whole, like, I have to do it now so I can do better later. And that's a hard
sure.
thing to force your brain to do when
Yeah.
your brain's like, no, you can just have the treat now. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
The little treats help, even if they're not
Yeah.
food.
And,
Even if
and-
they're just like, oh, I'm going to do something fun immediately after this.
And I think ultimately, I don't know if practice is necessarily intended to be fun, but it is intended to be engaging. And however you want to engage with that is up to you. So you can structure your own system, the tiered system of like rewards or steps that you need to like clear in order to get there. So I think for me, that's the part that kind of gets me through like a 3-hour long practice session, is knowing where I'm headed, but also like knowing what I get out of that ultimate point of arrival. So let's go ahead and pass it on.
Thank you so much.
We'll keep this really quick because we do have to clear out of
I
here.
mean, they
like,
aren't yelling at us yet, but
Yeah.
we do have to leave soon.
Yeah, I know. It's not every day I get my voice amplified. Geez. So a little bit of context about me. I'm a college student. I'm a game design major.
Oh, fantastic.
Oh, cool.
Also studied piano for 10 years under strict Russian instruction.
Yes,
like you.
I feel
So
your
yeah,
pain, brother.
You're
I'm
right
also,
to the soul.
I'm also a self-taught music composer myself.
Oh, fun. Okay.
I love the relationship between music and games. My first question to you guys is, how come, I guess, in the year of our Lord 2025, how the ability to learn an instrument is considered such a vital part of our brain's development, but video games isn't?
So video games are not considered an art form by the
Unfortunately.
general public.
Unfortunately.
If you've ever been to any of our other panels, I am insistent that they are an art form because I studied art history,
Good.
and I think that they're an incredible tool for getting very complex ideas into someone's brain because it forces active participation rather than passive audience just watching. And so I feel like video games can be an incredible way to learn complex theory, complex thoughts, things that are hard to explain in a lecture format. However, video games are still considered lowbrow, lay entertainment.
They're toys. Like,
They're
massively perceived
Yeah,
toys.
they are
Yeah.
not considered by the general public to be art and to be important. And the educational games that do exist are so focused on the teaching you the real life skill that they tend to not be as enjoyable as the ones that are teaching you how to, play the actual game.
Yeah, that's very unfortunate. And my last question, to be really quick, is I guess on a more personal level, do you have recommendations on how to get professional work as an aspiring composer or musician in games?
Networking.
You just got to go talk to people.
The unfortunate thing is that as a
It also
profession- yeah.
depends on what you're composing.
I mostly prioritize orchestral.
Okay, so conferences are a good place to go. Going to talks, going to panels, asking questions, introducing yourself, talking to, because like every art form that's engaged in by more than 2 people will have a conference dedicated to it. Like musicology has the American Musicological Society conference, which is annual. So, and that's a really good place for you to network, to meet people.
Also, places like MAGFest, if you can get a panel about, they just let anyone apply for a panel. You just got to write a good enough, description of it. So if you can apply for a panel about composing, that is a great way to sell yourself to a bunch of people who may want to buy a composer because there's a lot of game developers here.
Yeah.
And even just go down to the indie arcade and talk to them because there's a lot of indie game developers here who may not have a composer on staff.
Yeah, and they may not say yes, but they will certainly point you in the direction of somebody who might.
Yeah.
So that's a really important thing. Is like networking for me has been kind of.
Yeah, it's the unfortunate truth is the best way to get jobs is to go
sucks 'cause you have
talk to people.
No, I get it. Just,
Yeah.
yeah. All right.
Yeah, no, I wish you the best of luck.
Thank
I think
you
that
so
you're
much.
Really going to
Yeah.
benefit from just talking to folks and going to conferences and
Yeah.
this is a good
Also,
place to start.
if you get panels approved, you get to go to the convention for free.
True. Well,
They pay for your badge.
it was an honor to meet you guys.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
All right, pass it on.
Yes, we're not being yelled at yet.
We're not being.
I'll be quick. This is less a question, more of a recommendation. Have you heard about the game Nine Souls?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Started it actually. It's great.
I'm a little bit biased because I was a backer in that when they were running their campaign.
Oh,
You can hear my cat
cool.
in that, but like the simple observation I made of that is that it's similar to like Sekiro in that it's heavily parry focused, and
it's
the
Sekiro
thing,
plus Metroidvania.
yeah, the thing that clicked for me is that when you like apply music theory to it, a lot of those like boss fights or like general enemy designs are like interchangeable stanzas that they swap out for you, and yeah.
And it's just being able to read the tells and respond accordingly, which is kind of the core of chamber music.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
that's
Yeah.
great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But yeah, if
We were
you're-
actually talking about this in our hotel room with our roommates yesterday. We were talking about Nine Souls and a couple of other Souls-like games.
Yep.
Yeah, if you get far enough, you can hear my cat in that game.
That's amazing.
Oh, I'm gonna play that now.
Heck yeah, thank you. Hello, hello.
Hi. Oh, thank you. Oh, no worries. I just want to say I'm a jazz trumpet player and pianist who loves Souls games, and I just want to thank you for making a very directed panel. Just for it felt like it was for me.
I think this is the only convention we could do this panel at.
Yeah, no.
Any other convention would be like, "What are you talking about?"
It was
Try going to
fantastic.
AMS and being like, "Hey guys, you want to hear about some Dark Souls?" They'll be like, "What? No, get out of here."
No, it's a perfect, and I also Sekiro was my first introduction into it, so I felt very wow. Thanks for seeing me today.
And for a jazz player, especially considering how fundamental rhythm is to playing jazz, that's something that I struggled a lot with, and being able to kind of relate those two things for me was a really big. I think it was a really big milestone.
Was
All
there
right,
a
cool.
specific moment where that connection
The
formed?
Jomo Oniwa fight, where I realized that a lot of it it's really easy because I struggled with it for 3 hours, and I was like, wait a second, if I just pay attention and respond accordingly,
It
really
works.
what a concept.
All right, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
There is one person behind you. Hello.
Hi. Oh, thank you. I want to say I was a lot like you, and I'm not good at Soulsborne games.
Not
But I
even
love
a-
the lore. All my
Yes.
friends play. I just watch people play in Discord. Honestly, read the lore. But I am a raider in Final Fantasy 14, and I think that raid is.
I have a bunch of friends who play Final Fantasy 14,
especially
and it is
ultimate raiding is like this.
hearing
where you
people
do-
talk about raid mechanics is like listening to him talk about Soulsborne games.
It's like this was because you're doing hundreds of pulls for fights, and it's just repeating. And I haven't played instruments in a while, but I did when I was younger, like piano and stuff like that. And when you're just practicing a piece over and over again, but I've learned I've never done ensemble music, but I have friends who have. It's like raiding on a team of 8 people is you're relying on 7 other people to not fuck up. So you're
yes.
You have to interact.
It's not just yourself. It's your synergy with other people and doing stuff. And I thought that was a lot. I was thinking a lot about that.
That is a